All right, well, let's get started. It's 1:30 and we've got a lot of really rich material to listen to and talk about. So I want to make sure we get going and we've got space at the table for folks who come in afterwards. My name is Jill Pike and I'm the practice lead for land and agriculture at MCC. And it's a huge honor for me to chair this session. The approach we're going to take, there are 4 papers that will be presented. Each presenter has 15 to 20 minutes to share. We'll be at the 15-minute mark giving you like a 3-minute warning, and hopefully with that we can get in under 20 minutes for everybody. What I'd like to do is do all 4 presentations just to make sure that we have everyone gets a chance to say everything that they want to say, and then we'll do questions and discussion at the end. So as things pop up by way of questions, mark them down, and if we need to go back later to reference some material, we can do that. But we'll go through it all four before we start the discussion. I want to introduce our speakers. I'll do all of the bios right now, and then we'll move one by one. So we're going to start with some work that is going to be presented by Maya Schling. And this will focus on the effects of tenure security on women's empowerment and food security, looking at evidence from Ecuador. Mm-hmm. After that, we'll hear from Timothy Mutumbuka from Malawi, who's going to share with us his work on the efficiency of customary land tenure systems in resource allocation and impacts on well-being. After that, we'll hear from Ojino Manasoa from Madagascar, challenges of legal recognition of agropastoralist land rights in Madagascar. And lastly, we'll hear from Heather Huntington, improvement of land governance on Mailo tenure lands in Uganda. I'll do Maya's bio and then we can get started. So Maya Schling is an economist in the Environment, Rural Development, Disaster Risk Management Division of the Inter-American Development Bank. Substantial work and research experience in international development, specifically on agriculture, natural resources, and climate change. In recent years, she's been involved in design and implementation of impact evaluations for agricultural and natural resources projects in the Latin America region, Latin America Caribbean region, focusing on improved animal and plant health services, agricultural extension, and land titling and administration. Prior to joining the IDB, Maya has a PhD in economics from American University and has completed work in rural Zambia. Why don't you go ahead and we'll do bios as we go through.
All right. Thank you, Maya, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Seeing some folks that also participated this morning. I'm presenting my second paper today that I collaborated on with some colleagues that all at the time were at IDB, and since I've moved on to other institutions, Nicolas Passos, Leonardo Corral, and Marisol Righetti, on the effects of tenure security on women's empowerment and food security with evidence from a land regularization program in Ecuador. I'll provide briefly some motivation, although I'm sure most of you are well familiar with the context of women's empowerment in the agricultural sector or in general. It's well known that women's empowerment isn't a development objective in and of itself only, but it also is important to enhance overall household welfare because women tend to prioritize the health and well-being of the others in the family. So by supporting women, we support the entire family. Here's just a visual example of this. As women become more educated, which can be considered as a proxy of empowerment, the prevalence of undernourishment in the household declines. The empirical evidence on this is pretty solid. We know that when women's empowerment gets strengthened, nutrition health outcomes of the family increases, the incidence of domestic conflict and violence decreases. Women are able to participate more in community and producer organizations, which then also allows them to access credit more easily, participate more actively in economic activities. And this also it goes as far as having environmental benefits because they tend to adopt practices that are favorable to sustainable natural resource management. However, less has been done in the Latin American context. Most studies have focused on Africa and Asia. And, as is the case with a lot of academic research, some of the evidence is not as robust when only cross-sectional data is available or, quasi-experimental methods can't be implemented. And another factor is that the definition that is used in studies for tenure security varies significantly across studies and is sometimes imprecise, particularly when you consider the context of women's tenure security. It's important to take into account in what context or in what pre-existing land regimes these women, may receive title, because the acceptance of their community and the social awareness for what their rights and responsibility of holding tenure are very important, even more so than just holding legal land title. Going to the case of Ecuador briefly, as many countries across the world and in the region, they have made some strides towards gender inclusive policy. In the 1980s, Ecuador ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and shortly after that, it began legally recognizing property rights of persons in common law partnerships, meaning that not only partners in legal marriages, but also having lived together for a considerable amount of time would be considered as joint owners. In 2008, the Constitution was updated to explicitly recognize women's rights to land tenure, but only more recently in 2016 was a land law passed that really ensures the social, generational, and gender equality in land access and tenure. So, it's a work in progress, but a lot of progress has been made. And this leads me to the Siqueiras program, which is the land tenure program that will be evaluated here. Siqueiras is short for the Spanish acronym of the National System for Rural Land Information and Management and Technology Infrastructure Program, which had the objective of increasing productive efficiency and income of rural households in Ecuador. This program was implemented between 2012 and 2019 with financial and technical support from the Inter-American Development Bank the financial support in the amount of $90 million. And I'd like to briefly describe sort of the elements that were included in this program, because this will be important later on when we consider how this affected women's empowerment. The program was based on the sweep methodology and began by having a comprehensive cadastre sweep at the canton level, canton being approximately equivalent to a municipality or a county. This was done for 50 out of the 221 cantons in the country. The cadastral mapping was first done with orthophotography and was, of course, also georeferenced, and then field visits were conducted to validate the parcel boundaries that had been defined with this imagery. Once these cadastral maps and these digital maps had been created and validated, an important element was that public exposition of results meetings, or PEMs, were held in all communities that participated in the program. The program tried to ensure that not only household heads participated, but really all community members, including, partners, so that they could really get the buy-in of the entire community and ensure that everyone was in agreement with the parcel boundaries that had been established. And only once this agreement had been reached were the digitalized parcel maps handed out and issued to the individual owners. In case of remaining conflicts or issues around the parcel boundaries, a system for legal orientation was set up by the program as well to support farmers in resolving these conflicts. And another element was also, providing technical assistance to the canton governments to adopt a computerized data management system for the cadastre and property registry management. So this brings me to what were the gender inclusive elements of the titling process. Well, first of all, as I mentioned about the common law, any partners were recognized as joint owners on all documents. This included the legal title, but also the parcel maps that I just talked about. And I think particularly the PEM events were very important to ensure socialization throughout the entire community and also make women aware of their rights and responsibilities with regards to land title, an issue that has been highlighted in the research, and certainly in the case of Ecuador, is that women aren't always aware that they may have ownership of a parcel and what that may imply. So this activity was really important to create that awareness. And then the legal assistance services also had some gender aware or inclusive elements that provided additional support to women that sought this service. Now, I do need to highlight that the program did not reach one of its main goals, which was to issue more than 200,000 titles. This was a very elemental design flaw because the issuing of the title was actually not in the hands of the program. This was in the hands of the courts, which obviously should have been recognized when the program was first designed. And I think that's something that a lot of projects have run into. So in that sense, it was not successful because it wasn't able to issue any titles really. However, the digital parcel maps that I mentioned, 160,000 of them were issued to the individual landowners. And as I mentioned, community awareness was created through these meetings, as well as the fact that having access to this digital map actually facilitated access to certain government programs and credit. So a legal land title was not necessarily needed to access some of these services that farmers may have been limited from before. So we tried to look at whether the issuance of these digital georeference parcel maps were able to increase informal land tenure, making the differentiation between informal not being a legal land title, and seeing if this had an effect on women's empowerment and related household well-being indicators. So the two research questions we want to answer here is whether the enhancement of informal land tenure security through the issuance of these digital parcel maps affected women's empowerment and their bargaining power within the household, and whether this in turn led to improved indicators of household well-being. Here we consider, amongst others, production diversification and food security. The evaluation was designed or incorporated into the design of the program. The cantons were selected based on demand, so the canton governments had to sign up, fulfill out an application, commit the financial resources that would be needed, and participate in a negotiation process. And since there was a high demand, of the 171 cantons that had signed up, only 47 cantons could be selected due to the budgetary limits of the program, as well as, and I think this is important because it's an exogenous determinant, that the initial orthophotography in some cantons wasn't able to collect the necessary data because of cloud coverage. So these cantons in this phase of the program were excluded. So the treatment group was in the first step selected from these 47 selected cantons. 9 were selected for the treatment group, and then 9 cantons were selected from the remaining cantons that weren't going to participate for the control group. Once this was done, the cadastre sweep was conducted, and in addition to census data, farmers to be sampled were selected based on their exhibited tenure and security, so whether they had any conflicts in any of these plots, whether they had expressed interest in getting a title. So we use this in propensity score matching to really try to select carefully the treatment and control group and get comparable farmers in both groups. With this, we have a baseline and an end line that were collected in 2014 and in 2018 with the sample of a total of 2,700 farmers, this after the attrition in the end line. And then for the purpose of the gender analysis, we limited the sample, most importantly, to only farmer households that had both a man and a woman in the household and that they were partners. We purposely excluded female-headed households of single women because they would be very different from the other households, and the entire dynamics of intra-household bargaining, for obvious reasons, wouldn't be present there. The questionnaire collected detailed data on perceived and actual tenure status, sociodemographic characteristics, land and productive characteristics, as well as intra-household dynamics and food security. I just wanted to briefly mention some of the indicators we are using to measure empowerment and food security. For empowerment, we rely on the abbreviated Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, or AWAIE, which was initially developed by IFPRI and has been applied in all development contexts as far as I'm aware. It comprises 5 dimensions of women's empowerment: production, resources, income, leadership, and time use. And from these dimensions, the index is constructed as the 5 dimensions of empowerment index, which is then used to generate the inadequacy count, which weighs each of these dimensions equally to get to an index that ranges empowerment based on a variable that ranges from 0 to 1. For food security, we relied on FAO's Latin American and Caribbean Food Security Scale, which is an index constructed from 8 questions that assess the objective and subjective impressions of a household in terms of food acquisition within the last month. And from this, we calculated a simplified index of food security that takes the value of 1 if the household is food secure and 0 otherwise. And lastly, we used a crop diversity index to kind of capture the productive component of productive choices that women may make if they're more empowered, because we know that women may choose a different portfolio of crops than men would. And we rely here on the Simpson's Crop Diversity Index in 2 forms. One's for surface area, so seeing how crops are distributed in terms of the surface that they take up in the plot, and then the other being the market value that each of the crops planted has for the entire land that the household owns or that the woman owns. Just briefly, here's some descriptive statistics at baseline. You can see that there are some differences between treatment and control groups, which is something we will address with our empirical approach. And I won't go into much detail here due to the time constraints. Here you can see the inadequacy count and the different dimensions of empowerment. We also disaggregate the resources dimension between asset ownership and credit. Here we can see there's not a lot of difference between treatment and control. This is the food security index, also including variables of whether the woman makes decisions over food or the woman pays for food. And I should mention that this variable wasn't available at baseline. This was only included at the end line. So we only can do an ex post evaluation here. And the same is true for this is not true for the Simpson's Crop Diversity Index. So the empirical strategy that we apply. As I mentioned, some of the outcome indicators that we have are available for a panel data set. Some are only available for the end line. Depending on the availability for both, we apply the inverse probability weighting, which uses propensity score matching, and then regression weights to ensure we have a comparable treatment and control group. This is to ensure that some of the baseline differences that we saw can be controlled for and wouldn't affect our estimates of impact. And then the difference in difference model is applied, where you have one dummy variable, as you can see here in the regression equation, for treatment status, one for the time period, and then an interactive term between the two to estimate the impact as the differential trend over time in the treatment group. And with that, I'll jump into the results. So here you can see the results of the inverse probability weighting, where we included a number of variables that wouldn't be endogenous to our outcome indicators, but would determine the likelihood of a woman receiving the digital parcel map. And you can see, comparing the 2 graphs, that after applying these inverse propensity weights, the overlap between the 2 curves, the 2 distributions, is fairly close. So this gives us the sense that we have a comparable control group. And with that, I'll jump right into the results. So for women's empowerment, we do not find any significant impact on the aggregate inadequacy count, meaning that we can't say that receiving this digital parcel map increased empowerment overall. We do find that it increases access to credit particularly. And when we look at time use, looking at the different uses of time that a woman reports during a day, we see that women work more outside of the farm and that they spend less time on leisure. And this is relevant because we know that when women are able to work outside of the farm and generate their own income, can be another source of bargaining power within the household. For looking a bit closer at a woman's access to credit, we used some other variables available in the data set and saw that receiving this parcel map significantly increased the likelihood of a woman accessing and receiving credit and generating her own income. So again, this seems to confirm that women are able to, access something that they may have been constrained from before. And then if we look at wage and investment decisions, it's a bit more mixed. Really, we only find a significant impact on annual wage income, but not so much that their main occupation is not agricultural, for instance, which suggests that women still work on the farm, but do find some time to maybe have an off-farm business on the side to create some additional income. For the household's empowerment dynamics, we find that men slightly become less empowered with regards to resources and leadership. So this may be a bit a trade-off. Where women become a bit more empowered, men might have to take a bit of a step back. However, we do find that there's a negative significant impact on marital conflict. So the intra-household relationship doesn't seem to suffer as a result. For food security, we find that women that receive the digital parcel map make more decisions related to food and also pay for food more, and that overall the household is more food secure as a result. And then lastly, for crop diversification, we find that at least for the indicator that measures diversity in terms of the market value of the crops, that this increases for treated women. So this may suggest that women increase the diversity of the crops so that they're able to sell more on the market, which may then also contribute to household food security. And I know I raced through this a bit quickly, and I'm happy to answer questions later, but I'd like to just briefly summarize the results. So overall, the program did not seem to have increased aggregate empowerment, but we do find that empowerments happen in some of the dimensions, particularly in the resource dimension, as women were able to access more credit, work outside of the household, and generate some off-farm wages. It reduced the probability of marital conflict, and also enhanced food security and crop diversity. So this aligns with other studies that have reported that if women increase their empowerment and are able to work outside of the farm, that this can create some additional source of empowerment, and that overall, seeing as this program wasn't successful in issuing land title, and by no means is this a conclusion to say we don't need land titles. But in this specific context where a lot of effort was done to make women and the entire community aware of the rights and responsibilities around land ownership, it seems to have had an effect on how women perceive their access to land and how they use this knowledge to position themselves differently within the inter-household dynamics and the related bargaining power. So yeah, I'll wrap it up with that, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Maya.
Questions are at the end, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presenter is Timothy Mutumbuka. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, almost. Not close enough, but close. Timothy is a final year PhD student in development policy at the Korea Development Institute, School of Public Policy and Management in the Republic of Korea. His research interests revolve around political economy, development economics, including distributed politics in agricultural input subsidies, land tenure systems, inter-household resource allocation, Pareto efficiency, and agricultural productivity. Thank you, Timothy. Let's make sure that we've got your slides. This is the, we might look for your help. We've got this on a PDF. We want to make sure we can still project it over. Usually that will solve it.
The PowerPoint somehow seems frozen.
I saw it.
Okay.
Make it full.
Control
L.
Control L.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. First of all, before I start, I should make it clear. This is work in progress. Just started, and there are some issues inside, which I'm just presenting my suggestion, and I think comment on those issues will be very necessary. So I'm just interested to look at this, the efficiency, equity of customer and tenure and how it affects well-being of the people. So where it's coming from, like we know land properties govern various land-related activities, and property rights can be acquired through several means, including land or sales and through customer and tenure system. So when you look at sales and rental markets, these have been like proved to be more efficient, and the efficiency for these types of market is due to their flexible transfer of land rights governed by legal system, and a lot of people are satisfied with that. But also when we look at those who are looking at customer and tenure system, they've looked at it like most efficient and valuable for their reliance on local knowledge and tradition, and there are a lot of authors who are attested to that. But when we look at empirical literature, there have been a lot of evidence which has touched on sales and rental markets. And a lot of people have said on that. However, there's very limited literature when it comes to customer and tenure. When we look in terms of efficiency, equity, and how it affects the well-being of human beings. So this is what motivated me, like, okay, let me look at this type of thing, because people are considering sales and rental markets, and there's a lot of literature for that. So why did I go like for customer and tenure system? So when we look at the literature, like Sub-Saharan Africa, about 78% of land holding in Sub-Saharan Africa is through customer and tenure system. And this is according to a recent paper by Jangisha, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the names correct, and this is 23 paper. And only if you look at my country, Malawi, about 9% of the population, they practice customer and tenure system. So that's why I was interested into this. So what are the questions that I'm looking at? So the first question is like, I'm looking at the efficiency and equity of this under customer. Is it efficiency in land allocation? And does it promote equity in land allocation? So the second one, I'm looking at differential well-being effect between customer and system and land tenure through sales and rental market. There's a reason why I did looking at this differential, and I will explain it later on. So in doing this, we know that when we are looking at like the efficiency of land system, it is difficult to determine the efficiency at the first class. So there are several ways which have been developed. So one of them is the screening model based on self-selection through contract tests to evaluate the efficiency hypothesis. So this self-selection says like we don't know the capability of a person when he's coming to buy land or to rent land from you. You can only know when the person harvests and then we can measure. So that measure after harvest can be used as a proxy for the efficiency of a person who is lending or buying the land. So that's all about self-selection model, and that helps in the context where we have asymmetric information because we don't know the capability of a person. So that really helps. So in this study, we classify land tenure into two categories. Of course, there are small categories. Those I left them out. So the two categories that I classify in this customer analysis is one, inherited farmland, and the second one is land allocated by the chief. So those are the two categories that I have. So in terms of my key findings, it's just a snapshot of my findings. So the first one, when we're looking at efficiency, I find that farming ability does not affect efficiency in production. So the level of farming ability does not affect efficiency in production. So for example, inherited land tenure, of course, is associated with positive farming ability, but it's not significant. And when we look at land allocated by chiefs, is associated with negative farming ability, but it's also not significant. But when we look at equitable farmland distribution, I find interesting is that so it's found that inherited land tenure system promotes equitable farm distribution of farm allocation. So it means promotes the distribution of land from land rich people to land poor people. While on the other hand, farmland allocated by chiefs does not promote equitable farmland distribution. So I'm ignoring the rented and borrowing and borrowed and the sales one, the purchased one, the delivered, because I'm only concentrating mainly on the customer and so this one is just for comparison's sake. So in terms of welfare effect, I'm comparing customer and versus a combination of sales and rental markets, and I find no significant difference between the two. So in terms of significance of that, I look at this will shed more light on the efficiency and equity of customer and their impact on household welfare, because customer and tenure contributes a higher percentage to the land system in sub-Saharan Africa. So if we look at how efficient it is, that can help us to channel our energy towards which customer and tenure systems are best and can improve the welfare of people. And also it provides empirical evidence for alternative policy to ensure land tenure property rights in sub-Saharan Africa, because most of the current regions are advocating for recognizing those customer and tenures, digitizing them and normalizing them. But there is need for empirical evidence that which ones really promote equity and they are also efficient. So also this underscores the importance of continuing with local context and traditional practices in land tenure policies. This will ensure equitable resource allocation and sustainable development. So in terms of background, I'll be very quick. Land in Malawi is categorized in three categories. We have public, private, and customary form. So government owns the public land, including national park and reserves. Private land includes freehold and leasehold titles obtained through colonial governance. So we have tea estates. Those were obtained through colonial governance, and there are some other big estates which are obtained. Then customer land is governed by tradition, and it consists about 69%, as I already said. So this one is chief allocated customer land tenure. However, the license remains with the head of state, the president, and the president delegates the power to the Ministry of Lands, and the Ministry of Lands delegates the power to the chiefs. So it's just delegation of power. So at the end of the day, the chiefs are the ones who manage allocation of customer land tenure, but under the delegative power. So also the Malawi national land policy to allow registration and protection of customer land tenure. So customer land tenure is allowed to be registered and protection. And in 2016, the government further improved those by enacting some auxiliary laws to enforce that registration and protection of customer land tenure. So in terms of study design, I'll start with the data. The data I'm using the integrated household panel survey. This is the survey which is collected alongside the integrated household surveys in Malawi. And we had the aim of this survey to collect data to track trend in poverty, socioeconomic, and agricultural characteristics. And the first one happened in 2010, and this was conducted alongside the integrated household survey, and it had like 3,104 households. And follow-up surveys were conducted in 2013 and 2016 with those number of households, and the numbers are reducing because of the TISH. Some were being like migration and other issues, and also the budget constraint. Like the 2016 survey had a very few number, like 1,989 because of budgetary constraint. Yeah. The last wave of the integrated panel survey was conducted in 2019. But this one, I'm not including it in this study. The reason is, when this was conducted, it did not collect data on the rental and sales market. It only collected data on customer land system. So it was difficult for me to conduct the last part of analysis without that much needed information. So this is the summary statistics. So these ones, as I said, I did not like do some other thing on this table. I wanted just to give a clear picture. So we can look for protection value. You can see that there's too much variation, showing that there's some outliers. Because if you look at the mean, it's very low, and you look at the maximum figure, it's very high. So in the data set, there are some outliers. So in this study, what I did is I visualized, but I think it's subject like to discussion. I was afraid to remove these outliers from the data set because my total sample is already small. So if I start removing, I was afraid that I will remain with very few observations. That's why I just did visualizing. So the results presented in this paper are based on visualized numbers of outliers. So the rest of the observation are okay. The other interesting things like household age, yeah, 106 is okay. Some people live like that age, so that's fair. So in terms of equations that I'm using, so the identification strategy, the first one, I have to estimate the level of farming ability. So this is very common in literature. I've just replicated most of the literature using this. But the only difference is like I'm employing the fixed effect stochastic frontier model because most of the literature uses the true fixed effect model. So this one has shown that the fixed model lacks one thing. It does not parcel out the heterogeneity between individual, which is time invariant. So if we use the stochastic one, it's able to parcel out from that constant the actual efficiency component, which is represented by Uij. And this is strictly positive when we are looking at efficiency, when we are looking at the production side. So in this equation, Q represents the output, and the output is converted into Malawian currency, which is Malawi kwacha. Then we have the constant, and the ZIJT, these are the control variables that we saw. It includes the input, application of fertilizer, land used, labor, which is here is represented by adults equivalents. And the XI is other control variables, so it includes certification of the household head, age of the household head, all those are included there. Then VIJ, that's the normal error term, which is normal. Then Uij is now our variable of interest, which represents the efficiency and is strictly positive. Then after estimating that, I take the UI and put in the participation equation, which is the second equation. So for this question, I just use the normal OLS. Of course, most of the people use like those sophisticated maximum likelihood model, but for me, it produced the same result. So using OLS was okay for me. But in the appendix, I've included our logistic model to explain that. So that's the land tenure system, the first one. So it's like inherited land tenure system. It's a done if the household participated in inherited land tenure system or not. Then if that land allocation by chief, if the household got land from chief or not. So UI hat is the efficiency from the first equation, and the PA stands for plot area. Then XI, other control variables that I included in the equation. Then the last thing was the welfare effect. So the welfare effect employs household plot fixed effect model to analyze differential welfare effect between customer and tenure system. So the first is like I'm looking at like value of crop production, the first outcome, and the second outcome is value of crop sales from the plot. And the IT is inherited land tenure. It's a dummy variable, whether you inherited or not, whether you inherited compared to sales and rental market. So the CET is the same, whether you got the land from the chief, zero if the land was from sales or rental market. So from there, I go to threats to identification. So there are some threats to this attitude. So the first one is other compounding factors, and most of the study I've attested that the previous study. So for me to cater for that, I included like this variable, like soil quality and soil type of the plot, crop diversification, and the occurrence of added household member death and migration. So crop diversification helps to cater like risk aversion. Like because of the weather shocks, people do diversify because of the risk. If they plant one crop, they don't know what will happen. The weather will be bad. So the vegetation I captured by a number of crops that household plants on the plot. And apart from that, I also included the MC device, moderate chambering device. This is like averages of the continuous variables control for the correlation with the time invariant factors. Then the other thing is specific to individual characteristics and dynamic decision making of household over time. Because like household do change their decision over time. So during this time, we have to capture that change so that we're safe. So to do that, I use the lag of farming ability to test the persistence of past experience. So at first, I used the farming ability in the normal equation, but I tested that using the lag of farming ability just to test the persistence of past trend. So I'll go quickly to the results. These are my results, and I've highlighted the low global annual rainfall. This is previous season. So I have mentioned here that in my data set, the questions are like, okay, what was your yield last season? So the variable for rainfall is also rainfall last season, rainfall this season. So my thinking is that the best variable to use is last season. But when I use last season, it's giving me a negative coefficient, which is against literature. When I use present rainfall, it gives me a positive thing. So I tried to figure out what is happening. So I tried to check under World Bank, the climate knowledge portal, World Bank. I found that all this year when the survey was happening, we had those weather shocks and we had heavy floods, which affected a lot of people in the country. All the years where we had this survey. So that in my thinking was that can be explained in that one. But when I put the current time, it gives me a positive figure. So I'm still laughing my head over that thing. So in terms of farming ability score, I found a mean of 0.08, and it ranges from 0 to 0.83. This shows that Malawian smallholder farmers are not efficient at all, because they are far away from the maximum feasible output of 1. If the farming ability score is 1, it means they are very efficient. But the mean here is 0.08, which is very, very, very low. So in terms of determinants, I'm looking at the first and the second. These are the most important ones. So the first one is predicted farming ability. This tells us whether a household is efficient or not. The second one is the plot area. This one now talks about the equity. So in terms of farming ability, it shows it does not affect the probability of household participating in those customer land tenures. But if we look at now the equity part, if we look at the first column, the plot area has got a negative coefficient. This shows that, okay, an increase in plot area. That one, it means reduces the probability of participating in inherited land tenure. So if an increase in plot area reduces the probability, it means that is now promotes equity. It means those with high land area, they don't demand much for inherited land tenure. That leaves it to those land poor households. So when we look at land allocated by chiefs, we see that there is a positive. So it means those who have already, who are land rich, are the one who acquire more land under land which is allocated by chiefs. So it means it does not promote equity. So those are the. So I think I'm disregarding the last two columns about rented and purchased. The other just the control variables. I think I will not go much on those because of the time. And this is the welfare effect. So this, as I said, I'm comparing the welfare effect. So inherited farmland tenure compared to land and sales market. The reason I compared is like land and sales market on their own, if I take one by one, they have very few like observations. So I thought like if I do separate all of them, it means I will not be capturing the full picture because and rental and sales market, the observation are very few. So that's why I combine them and compare them with customary and tenure system. So in terms of those welfare, like if I look at those outcomes, I see no differential impact on the welfare of the human being. So based on this finding, this paper recommends like I think the best way is to promote community engagement in policy development or empower local chiefs because the local chiefs are the ones which have shown like they are not associated with equity in land distribution. And like inherited land is better at split land equitably. So local chief is the area which we should work on to improve on the allocation management of the land by local chief. So when we're developing like policies, the government should focus more on empowering these chiefs so that they should be more organized in allocating land equitably. Then also the legal framework to recognize customer and tenant. Of course, the legal framework is there, but the problem is now implementation. Because as I said, customer and tenant was already recognized long time ago, but the problem is implementation. That's why we find that most of the customer and tenant are not digitalized or are not like does not have like legal papers because the law is not being implemented and the framework is not being implemented. Now, future studies I'm looking at, like, I think using year panel data to observe seasonal dynamics. So this is important because the data means in like a gap of 4 years within the land tenure system can change. The efficiency can change within the 4 years. So that is change. So if we have like year data, I think that will be more feasible and in fruit acquisition time because like I'm looking at this capital management, like what I'm missing is when did that household acquire that land tenure? So that is also can be a good thing for futures. I think this is just a conclusion. I'm just repeating the same. So because of time, I think I should stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Is it,
No.
no?
It works.
It works?
Yes. Just okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me. We're going to move to Madagascar now for our next paper. Ojino Manasoa is a researcher and PhD student from Sirad, and here goes my French skills. Let's do some quick translation into English. The Doctoral School for Natural Resource Management and Development. Did I get that right? At the University of Antananarivo. His research focuses on the governance of extensive pastoral areas from 3 angles: the land tenure rules and land rights of agropastoralists, the interaction of agropastoralists with other actors and authorities, and the land tenure security. He draws on institutional economics in his approach, seeking to better understand the extent to which Ostrom's commons may be similar to or different from pasture land, and which legal tool for land security meets the needs of agropastoralists and other stakeholders. Trained as an agronomist engineer, before embarking on research into land tenure, natural resource governance, and pastoralism, Ojino is a founding member of Think Tani, think tank on land issues in Madagascar.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Ojino Manasoa. I'm a PhD student, as she said, and I'm so delighted to be with you today to present the results of my research on the challenges of legal recognition of agropastoralist land rights in Madagascar. So to begin with, the messages of this presentation is to emphasize that if we want to secure the rights of agropastoralists in Madagascar, we need to consider three main points. Firstly, pasture land in Madagascar are territories with non-boundaries made up of space with a mosaic of resources and subspace. Secondly, these territories have several local land rights holders, in particular local agropastoralists as manager or owners, and can be secured and regulated, not in a single way, but in different ways. Thirdly, territorial boundaries may evolve as may land use in the medium term. So we therefore need to take this into account in our process of securing land. We will see it later. So now let's have a look on how the herders manage their pasture land in Madagascar and interact with other stakeholders. In terms of use, herders use the large pasture land in Madagascar through two main types of livestock management. Firstly, there is a semi-extensive herding with herds mobilized for farm work, followed daily by herdsmen and brought back to the villages in the evening. And then there is an extensive management involving larger herds, and these kind of herds are mobilized and they tend to fulfill in the event of problem, and they're not monitored daily but checked weekly in the pasture land by their own owners or herdsmen. So these different herds graze on pasture land all of the year or for one season only, depending on the context, on the location of the villages. So, but at time, there is herds from other villages, from remote villages, who came into another pasture land, but there is no, in Madagascar, the maximum distance covered by those kind of transhumance is maximum 30 kilometers. There is no transhumance over very long distance as in West Africa there. So in general, one household in two owns cattle in Madagascar. However, despite the importance of this type of farming, pasture land remains little known areas in Madagascar, sometimes even subject to the misconception that these lands are neither used or appropriated. However, in practice, these areas are subject to change, to pressure, and above all, competition for use as family farms are expanding there, and more young people and migrants want to settle there to feed their families. These lands are also affected by agribusiness, reforestation, and conservation projects. So, in fact, if this area have become subject to pressure and competition for use, it's generally because the public policy and development project in Madagascar take little account of it. To make a long story short, in 2005, Madagascar implemented a land reform that led to the recognition of customary rights through formalization by a land certificate, but this recognition did not apply to pasture land. There have also been a law on transfer of management of natural resources to an association called VOE, but this transfer does not protect extensive livestock farming from probable change of use. So actually, a draft law covering pasture land is on the political agenda about community land rights, and that's why I'm doing this presentation to see which path are the most interesting to follow for this community land recognition. Given this national context, in order to explore ways of recognizing the rights of agropastoralists, we first ask ourselves the question: what are the strategies and means used by agropastoralists or herders to protect their access to pastoral resources and maintain their management power over these territories? In our study, the analysis was based on bundle of rights, the strong bundle of rights to land and associate resources according to local rules. And then we made an analysis of social insecurity and challenges too. In all, some 250 interviews were carried out in several villages with different resource persons. And if this is the methodology used for the study, what are the physical characteristics of the pasture land in Madagascar? Firstly, the pasture land can be different from what we often see in Africa, with socially known boundaries such as hills and rivers and surface areas ranging from 500 to 5,000 hectares. But in some other respects, they may be similar to those of other African countries in the sense that the pasture lands are military resources, housing for its grasses, watering holes, trees, and animals. Now, what about the actors in charge of the management of the pasture lands and the users? For this part, the point to remember is that there are two main sub-areas in terms of land control and grazing use in pasture land in Madagascar. Firstly, there is the herd gathering area, a few hectares in size, usually in more wooded subzones and close to watering points shown in this diagram as triangle, the yellow triangle. Secondly, the rangeland, consisting of large areas of savanna with various degrees of tree cover, ranging in size from 10 to hundreds of hectares, which we see as the clear green zone and the diagram. So the manager of these two areas are not the same. For the herd gathering place, the owner is the big pastoralist. What does it mean? It means that they are the head of a agropastoralist family, often with between 30 and 500 cattle, as they possess the rights of use and exclusion, and they can transfer the herd gathering place to their descendants as inheritance. Whereas for the herd grazing area, there are only the big agropastoralists are only managers. They're not honored this time because they are consulted by herders from distant villages if they want to introduce herds into a pasture land. And the user of the second categories are therefore all of the herders from villages close to the pasture land, as well as those from far away. So, in terms of land tenure and governance, these pasture lands, as we see, correspond to unconventional strong commons, in the sense that we find the main characteristic of a common, except the fact that the collective involved does not follow the Stramian model. What does it mean? It means that there are no meetings between members of the collective, except in the event of a serious problem, nor are there any election within it. But at the same time, pasture lands are also polycentric, with a agropastoralist on one side and on the other side, manager of protected areas or village association who officially manage certain pasture land included in their zone. So, in the event of challenges to their right to control and use pasture land, what are the strategies used by agropastoralists or used by herders to defend their rights, their land rights? The main message here is that despite their efforts to protect their rights in the face of various challenges, pastoralists need more protection against challenges from actors from outside the pasture land than those inside. I mean, a case in point is the challenges to the rights to make pasture renewal fire in case of pasture land in protected area and VOEs. In that case, the reaction strategy used by agropastoralists is to ignore the restriction imposed by the protected area and village association called VOE. But, as it's a kind of restriction they didn't follow. So it can be severely sanctioned. There are penalties for this. Then there are also another challenges is the companies or enterprises that arrive and challenge almost all the rights of agropastoralists or the herders, who are often under the pressure from the states in the negotiations. But even more interestingly, there are elites who are not pastureland users, but who can also challenge agropastoralist control, management, and use rights by introducing migrant farmers into the pastureland without consulting the locals, and that led to a conflict. Agropastoralists respond to that challenges by forming alliance with the local association or the village association or with the protected areas. Apart from those challenges from outside, there are also occasional internal tension at the merging of farming and grazing areas, but the locals, especially local herders and local farmers alike, manage to resolve this problem among themselves. So, given these challenges from outside the grazing lands and the agropastoralist strategies, how can we secure agropastoralist land rights? As we mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, and before going into ways of securing land rights, we need to remind of these three essential points about Madagascar pasture land. Firstly, the existence of well-known pasture land boundaries as well as characteristic subareas and mosaic resources. Secondly, there is no single means of securing pasture land, but several, depending on the context and the rights held by agropastoralists in the area. And finally, the land use may evolve in the medium term, and the herders themselves are aware of this, but they want to be taken into account in the process of securing land rights. So, well enough. Let's see. So, in the case of pasture land located in protected areas, what we see and what we recognize is the negotiation with protected area, because we find it very essential to guarantee the protection of rights, particularly against changes of use. And in the case of pasture land outside protected area, innovative approaches can be envisaged. So why innovation? Why avoid the mobilization of title and certificates for this pasture land? That's a very big question, because firstly, in the case of Madagascar, land title are very expensive and inaccessible to local agropastoralists. And there is also the risk of defining a single legal owner to the detriment of all other rights holders and users. The same risk applies to the formalization of a collective, since agropastoralists, as we mentioned earlier, do not function as an association, and they only hold meetings when there is a serious problem. And what's more, there is also a risk of exclusion for user villages that are a little far away, or for agropastoralists who are not part of the collectives. So, what other options are possible? So the first thing we can do is to collectively identify the territory with local people, of course, through local committees for the recognition of land rights, by mobilizing local resources and very simple techniques at the level of decentralized institutions. We can then mark these boundaries obtained in the local land use plans, emphasizing that the territory cannot by default be appropriated by the state, and that local governance already in place should be allowed to function by allowing families to appropriate or even certify and title agricultural plots if they have the means, unless a village representative objected. It's a kind of territorial project in which representative of the population must participate and then negotiate among themselves and, if necessary, with outsiders. So, yeah, that's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Heather's next, yep. As you know.
Had a long day.
So let's get, actually, we might need some help on the
I'm terrible at this. Anything. Were my co-authors here? No. Oh, there you are. Okay, Dan, you're right here. I was gonna say there's either like a lot of
Oh,
comments.
which this, I think this is the right one. Yeah, no, this is,
Nope.
that's me for, Mailo lands in Uganda.
That one. This is, yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. Let me introduce Heather, but we've also got multiple co-authors in the room, maybe all of the co-authors in the room. So Heather Huntington is a professor of practice in the Department of Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania. She serves as executive director of Penn Development Research Institute, DevLab at Penn. Her research interests include land tenure, land administration, natural resource governance, and environmental conservation. Dr. Huntington has served as the technical lead on impact and performance evaluations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. She has a PhD in political science and public policy from the University of Michigan. Thank you, Heather.
All right. Let's do this. Get this over with. No, I'm sure. Okay. And so I am presenting on behalf of our team. This includes Kate Mark-Cantrell. Everyone knows Taya. And Daniel is not here. Is he coming or?
I think he's in other,
He's in another. Okay.
just fits himself.
Yes, in many he needs to clone himself. Okay. So I'm going to be presenting our end-line evaluation results for the GIZ Improvement of Land Governance in Uganda project. And so we are working on finalizing the report. The report, I think, is pretty close to being wrapped up, but this is still not final. There we go. You know, you all know the drill. Background, intervention, methods, findings, discussion. I will say that this is a pretty big report. We looked at lots of outcomes. And so we weren't able to cover all of this in the 15 to 20 minutes that we have here. So I have selected a couple outcome areas and things to talk about, but happy to discuss more if folks are interested. So what is our context? Very quickly, what we are focused on for this study is the Mailo landlord-tenant relationship. And so we are especially focused in central Uganda, in the kind of Uganda kingdom, where we have these Mailo lands. And that is where the study focused. And essentially we have an area of high tenure insecurity, a number of disputes that the program focused on resolving, and I think just sort of a generally tense situation for land issues. So in order to attack these development challenges, sorry, my vocabulary is fading as the day goes on, we have the GIZ Improvement of Land Governance in Uganda pilot project. The time frame for the project ran from 2017 to 2023, and the goal was really to secure tenure for the Mailo tenants with the ultimate objective of improving investment and productivity in these areas. Underlying this was, of course, again, sort of focusing on the conflict dynamic. So there's a strong focus on conflict resolution, And so the particular interventions that the program focused on included land inventories, which was a low-cost land survey using systematic demarcation, and this provided the tenants with documentation. There was conflict mediation. There were also sort of ways that the program worked to kind of improve the dialogue and relationships between the landlords and their tenants. And there was a number of awareness raising and capacity building moments for the key stakeholders. So those are kind of the core interventions that we are looking at as part of the impact evaluation. In particular, we're focusing on kind of the conflict and also the documentation side here. The evaluation design. This is a geographic discontinuity approach on the sub-county borders. And so it involved approximately 200 treatment and control enumeration areas. So these were sampled along the borders for treatment and control. Baseline data was collected in 2017. The end data was collected last year in 2023. To the extent possible, we retained the same instruments and same questions. We did make some modifications to try to add in a little bit more understanding of context and mechanisms, but we really tried to keep it the same. And this is quasi-experimental difference in difference specification. Again, for the indicators that were added at endline, we ran those as cross-sectional. So for some of our indicators, it's more of a kind of impact panel. We feel better about these results in a causal framework. For some of our other indicators, they're interesting, but they're cross-sectional. If you want all of the details about which indicator is which and which one is like stronger evidence, you will read the very long report. So our data sources, we had household questionnaire, agricultural questionnaire, and a landlord questionnaire. Again, for the household, the tenant, the household side of this with the agricultural questionnaire as well. This was a panel. For the landlord questionnaire, this was something that was added at endline, and so this is not a panel, and this was also kind of a challenging data collection moment. So we learned a lot there, but we did not kind of really cover the full extent of the landlords. Evaluation methods. So we looked at both the intent to treat effect and also the treatment on the treated. So similar to things we've discussed earlier in this room with some of the same people, the registration and the documentation was not necessarily covering the full sample, right? So we have some people that did end up receiving the documentation and were mapped, whereas even though there were some households in the treatment communities, they did not end up receiving the documentation and receive the mapping. So we've looked at the treatment on the treated, those who actually were mapped and treated versus in addition to the people who were also living in the treatment zone. The other thing that we really focused on a lot with this study was trying to look at subgroup effects. So we ran subgroups for a number of groups. We looked at women, we looked at youth. And then as you will see, because of this dynamic with, of course, the landlords, we were looking at those related, those who expressed some sort of relation to a landlord, as well as those who said they did not know and were not related to the landlord. We wanted to see if that explained some of the differences that we were, some of the results that we were finding. As I mentioned, we looked at a number of different outcome families. So we looked at all of these different things. I am going to just talk today about the ones that are underlined in the spirit of some of the other topics and conversations of the conference. But we do have results on these others. So we're happy to talk about those and or you can find them in the report. So the first thing I want to talk about was the Busulu payments. So as part of the this area and this context, you have these ground rents that are due to the landlords, and part of the sort of way to secure tenure, if you will, for a tenant can be through the annual payment of these Busulu ground rents, and they're quite small. They're not. It's not. I mean, granted, this is not a wealthy area, but these range from about $1-ish, $1 US, in the rural areas up to around a couple dollars, depending on, they vary across the study area. But technically there's supposed to be a token rent that is paid, and once it is paid every year, then it can really secure the tenant's right to the parcel. So we looked at this payment. We looked at it for any type of payment made. We looked at the amount of Busulu paid, and we looked at the annual Busulu payments made. And so while we did find some evidence here, this only it would be direct beneficiaries. This is the treated untreated. These are the people who actually got mapped and actually received the documentation. So one of the things that you'll find with this slightly confusing table here that I've put up is that we often find that the treatment effect is centered on the treatment of the treated and not on the intent to treat area. So you really have to interview and have data on the people who are mapped and received the documentation. Otherwise, if you just sample the area where the treatment rolled out, you are not going to see this. And so we found that we have improvements in the program for people actually paying some Busulu payment. However, we didn't find any changes with regards to, generally speaking, the amount paid or the annual Busulu, or people making the annual Busulu payments. So we tried to unpack this a little bit. These are just the regressions. Y'all have been looking at tables all day. So this is our intent to treat specifications. This is our average treatment of treated. And then these are across our subgroups. So we tried to unpack this a bit to understand the variation or lack of Busulu payment, because this is a kind of a first order expected treatment effect, right? This is a goal of the project. This is something that I think was the team wanted to really see this move, and they wanted to see that the program move the needle on this. So these are the descriptive statistics for how often the different people are paying, never once, twice, 3, 4 times annually. This is across the last 5 years. And so when we look at people who are never paying, one of the things that really stood out is that this often happens when you have the landlord as a relative. So when you have a dynamic of, and I think these two are interlinked. This is like the thing we're trying to interrogate a bit here. The landlord never asked, and the landlord is a relative. So you have this context where, you know, we can potentially have sort of kinship relations and traditions where, you know, it could be socially against the norms to ask for these payments or provide these payments. It could also be potentially a moment where it would be rude to provide this. So these are sort of things we're trying to dig into to explain why we are not seeing the expected results here. If anyone has the answer to this question, please let me know. Okay, land conflict. We do find significant positive results for this program for land conflict. And these are panel results, and these are results where we feel that the evidence is pretty quote unquote strong. So unlike some evaluations we again talked about for those of you who are in the room this morning, where we're not seeing a lot of movement on land conflict, it's hard to study land conflict. This is a study where again it was directed to an area that had a relatively significant amount of land conflict going on, right? And also the program really targeted that. And so we do see the sort of expectations of improvements in reducing land conflict pretty much across the board for different subgroups and for the overall sample. This is just the kind of summary of that. So treatment respondents are 5 to 6 percentage points less likely to have experienced conflict, less likely to report feeling that they will be likely to experience a future conflict. And then those hold for women and youth. Here is the regression table. I'll just leave that up there for a second, just to let it sit up there for a second. You can find all of these beautiful tables in our report. Obviously, we looked at perceived tenure security. This was another outcome family where we did add some indicators at Endline to try to flesh out a little bit more, get a little more traction in measuring perceived tenure security. I think, you know, we didn't, across all the indicators, we didn't really see a ton of benefits for this except the youth. There were some following improvements that showed up. People felt that they could leave their land fallow without it being taken away. This was a moment of, do we put fallowing in investment or do we put fallowing in tenure security? So that was, we put it here. You can disagree with that. But essentially, although we saw improvements in land conflict, if you read the report, you'll also see improvements in fears of expropriation and improvements in land rights. Those didn't carry over to the perceived tenure security side. And that's, I guess, one of the things that has come up in a number of sort of evaluations, like how to, continuing to try to figure out how to measure perceived tenure security for these studies. Move on here. The descriptives really just kind of show the story, right? So this is Endline descriptive statistics. These are different indicators. This is aggregate, treatment and control. They're pretty flat, right? We're not seeing any major jumps. So, of course, this is reflected as well in the okay, credit. So we found some interesting credit results. So in this context, people can use their documentation for accessing credit, right? So we have a context where people can actually take this document and go and use it for credit, unlike some other contexts where that's not the case, and so therefore you wouldn't expect to find credit. So here, what we find is that, in particular, these SACOs, which I can't remember what that stands for.
Credits Association, I think.
Yeah, like local credit associations. Here what we find is that for, again, the illegal beneficiaries, the people who receive the mapping and receive the documentation, they have an uptick in borrowing from these local villages, the credit associations. And this is stronger for women. We do find that women are then less likely to borrow from the village savings and loan groups. So trying to explain that, maybe they're just shifting away in the treatment areas for various reasons to the SACOs from the VSLAs. But we did find this to be an important result because the program has invested in trying to ensure that link between the financial services and the finances from the banking side with the documentation provided. So there's been a concerted effort to make that link, and we're seeing that from in the evaluation results. I should also say, just to highlight again, just to bring to everyone's mind, the exposure period for this project is about 2 to 3 years, depending on the area. So you know, the exposure period is 2 to 3 years. This is not a very long-term study, but it's also one where there's been a little time to see the maturation of the treatment effects. This is just the descriptive statistics for the for what's happening here, and so you can just see the little uptick is reflected in terms of a treatment area taking out a loan. So the documentation in this case, which is the land inventory protocol, can be used to verify the productive potential of land. Yeah. All right, there's your table. There's your table to support these findings. Investment. This table looks different just because we looked at so many different investment outcomes. Essentially, we have no change in investment. Okay, so we looked at a lot of different things here. We have a negative finding. I don't know, can't explain that. We're trying to think about how to explain some of these. But essentially, there's no compelling story about an investment story for this program, right? I think, you know, if you look at the summary, this is the summary for the overall effects of the program, including what we didn't talk about today, but you see a lot of green on the board, right? You see a lot of green on the board. but you don't see the investment and you don't see the kind of longer term, right? So this is similar to Ben's, for those of you that were looking at, we're here today for Ben's presentation, where we see some of the shorter term movements in some of these land impact evaluations, but as we go further down this chain, this starts to like drop away. So I think this is just in line with some of the other things that we're seeing as we grow the body of evaluations and as we start to synthesize these findings. And that's it. And I finished the alt.
All right. There are a lot of rich threads to pull on as we look at these 4 papers together. So I'd like to just throw open the conversation. Questions for Maya around the Ecuador experience, Ogino on Madagascar, Timothy, his Malawi paper, and Heather and team on Mailo lands in Uganda. So who wants to get us started? And if you could please just identify yourself as you pose your question. Thank you.
My name's Lauren Honig. I'm a political science professor at Boston College. Do work on land rights in Zambia, Malawi, Senegal. And my question's for Timothy. I thought that your paper is really important and the question you're asking is really, really interesting. And I was wondering if you could share any of your insights about sort of the heterogeneity in who customary tenure is working for or not. I know that you didn't. This wasn't part of this presentation, but I'm curious about if there are certain areas of the country where you think that the equity impacts are better, or if there are certain individual characteristics or institutional characteristics. I'm just curious about some of to hear a bit more about the variation in who it works for and who it might not work for.
Yeah, we've got time, so let's just go one by one.
Okay. Thank you very much for this important question. I think that's a very good idea, but unfortunately, I did not look into that. I've not calculated which area works best. But as you pointed out, I think this is another area that I have to because I have the data for all the region, all the districts, so it's easy for me to do that. That's why which areas works better and which areas it doesn't really work better. Thank you very much for that question.
I have a question for Katie. Please. Okay. So your sample was with the women? Just the women?
It was at household level.
Okay.
And we interviewed both the household head, and if the household head was a man, then we applied the empowerment and food security module to the woman separately.
Okay. And then just one more little question, then I'll go away. So were their names required to be on the documents, or was it did the woman's name have to be on the document, or did that depend on sort of the decision making of was that a requirement?
It was a requirement. If it was either common law or a marriage, then both of their names would have to be on the document.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. I think I was looking at the figures in the tables. So look, annual wage income, the coefficient was probably 419. But if you look at female income, it was 0.something. I was just wondering, did you do look for female unlocked or the general unlocked, or what really happened in the data?
Yeah, I think what we think happened as a result of the program is that women that had not had outside income before, because they felt more secure in their tenure, were able to start either opening a small business or working outside of the household and starting to generate income. Relative to overall household income, this wasn't necessarily significant, but it did allow them to have money that they themselves generated and were able to have more agency over how it would be spent.
Alessia of the University of Manchester. I have a question for Mailo, but potentially also for our last paper. So, as far as I recall, there was a portion, especially for within men, that were not interested in paying, even though they potentially could have. So there was not kind of a credit constraint. And I was wondering whether you have a way to explore the fact that they might not feel necessary to have a title because social norms kind of complement the security of land anyway. And this might explain some of the maybe not great impact that you find. So as if there's no really need for a title to have, because the kind of customs and social norms complement that.
So I'm not sure where you saw that men don't want to pay or don't have access to credit.
No, I just saw that in the table, the pie, the issue that there were some that didn't pay, but that was not, and some of them, the majority was kind of credit constrained, but there were like a small histogram that kind of didn't say. So my thoughts were, if not related to credit constraint, what could it be?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I think I'm not entirely following because I don't have the table present, but I think generally what the literature has shown, and I think what our study also sort of corroborates, is that when women have access to credit and when men have access to credit, they don't necessarily spend it on the same things, and women are more prone to spend it on things that will benefit the household. So in our case, it seems that they made decisions to diversify crops differently and to use their money to buy food for the household. Whereas we didn't look at this for men because this wasn't a part of the empowerment module, so it was only applied to the woman in the household, but it would be feasible to say that men likely would have spent the money on other things. So then, in that sense, lifting that credit constraint for women has a different effect on household well-being than it would have lifting it for men, which is why it's so important that at least it's joint ownership between men and women. If not, women have ownership over the parcels that they own. I'm not sure if I'm entirely answering your question.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
I think relatively speaking with other areas of Africa that we work in where the tenure security is quite high going into some of these projects, this area showed, especially a baseline, a pretty high level of tenure. It still shows a pretty high level of tenure and security. The sources for that tenure and security are directed specifically at landlords and the government. So it could be sort of whether or not people perceive that this document can help them if the government does try to, right? So there's that sort of issue, but I would say that in terms of levels of conflict and levels of tenure security, this is not a case where you go in and you see that 90% of people say their rights are secure and they're totally safe, right?
From Sierra. It's a question from Maya. I'm very curious, and it's very impressive to see the favor project in Ecuador. You test the effect of obtaining a title. Did you also test the effect of not obtaining a title?
We did not test, or we weren't able to test because really no farmers received titles. So we tested whether they received the georeferenced digital parcel map.
But when they get nothing, did they get stressed by the situation?
Well, all farmers in the treatment group did receive the digital parcel. So because of that, we weren't able to, and I agree, it would be interesting to see whether having the expectation of receiving title and then not receiving it, that may even have a detrimental effect on tenure security, that might influence productive decisions. But unfortunately, in our context, we're not able to test that.
Okay.
Do you know if they expect to receive it? Because in a lot of these contexts, even if they have not received anything, they still think they're going to get it eventually. So if they received a map, do they think they'll eventually get the official title as well?
From what I understand from some of the interviews we conducted with the implementation unit, I don't. There doesn't seem to be an expectation to receive title just because they're so aware how slow the process is. I mean, you know, the titles are going through the judiciary process, but because the courts are so backed up and every single title has to be processed through there, it is very commonly known that this takes years, if not, 10 plus years. So from what we understand, they were happy to have received something, which is the digital parcel map, and that gave them access to some government programs. But I don't think, from what I understand, and to put it quite simply, no one was holding their breath to actually get the legal end title.
Maybe to add to this, because so yesterday we presented a report on land policies in Africa. And what seems to be emerging for rural land actually is this just making the boundaries clear is actually largely sufficient to get a lot of these effects. Going all the way to tightening, which is very expensive, all these procedures, is probably not needed for not in current situations of many places, just to get a lot of these effects. And in Uganda, it was not there and Ecuador was presented, but you see a lot of studies where you actually see an effect of just the boundary map, just clarifying with your neighbors, that your neighbors accept your boundaries, that the local governments are not challenging boundaries, that some officials accept your boundaries, is often already giving a lot of this push. Because if there is no land market, why would you want titles? If credit, because credit is always linked to the collateral, is also really trust you, it's even access to finance. So there might be all kind of other things. Of course, on investments, just having a document without the other things you need to reduce makes it also, because it is a binding constraint for productivity increases. So is it always a thing security, which is probably more of a conflict. And maybe it's not everybody in that community that might be, like you're saying, some people are very secure because they are related to the right people. There are always groups of people saying, like, you know, percent, like in Benin, it was particularly migrants who benefited because if they, through the occupancy already were accepted, they suddenly felt encouraged to start investing. So it is maybe also not like that. What is the importance of like what we say in the more rural areas where there's not a big land market, where there's not a lot of credit available. So we want to invest because resources are scarce, so what could be the priority and should be maybe some targeting, etc. But I do think it's a bit interesting, of course, it's this tenant landlord situation, of course, with colonial roots, but it might be a situation we see more and more places in Africa moving in that direction, that are more and more people actually in a kind of tenancy position. What would it mean? Of course, Uganda is special because Mailo is recognized. And indeed, the big thing is there, if you pay through, government recognize your right. It doesn't mean matter how much you pay, which is of course not the case in many countries. That there's no way to get some recognition of this tenant-landlord relation, which is not secure. Okay, let me stop here. Was a comment.
Yeah, no, and I just let me react. That was actually, Taya, the theme that spoke to me very loudly as I looked at all four of these cases, both the Ecuador example where people didn't really get what they were supposed to get, but they got something and that had a lot of value. And the Madagascar story as well was not focused on individual rights, but the paper painted such a rich picture of this mosaic of, is your word, of overlapping spaces and expectations and obligations and resources with boundaries that move and change as the climate changes, as availability changes. And so really kind of shook me back to this question that we all think about, but maybe not all the time, around what is the kind of tenure security that's enough, and what is it that individuals and families and communities need. And even in the face of so many reforms in so many countries that have decentralized to very, very local levels the ability to recognize and document, even at a low cost, it's still highly formal and formalized. And some of these other examples are also sort of whispering that not in every context is that even necessary, needed, and could sometimes even be problematic.
Just to add, Jill, because
Yeah.
I do think official recognition of a parcel map is important.
Mhm.
And it somehow comes up in a
Yeah.
cadastral map. That is important.
Yeah.
Going all the way to title,
Yeah.
not be against the
Exactly, the boundary. It's there's a spatial. It's the spatial
dimension
that really grabs people and is important.
It
and
has
has power.
Gives you some
Yep.
perspective and some
Yep.
information.
And the other stuff maybe has relevance for people who sit in offices and draft laws, but isn't as kind of material to people who it matters to most.
From Michigan State University. So I'm just wondering, so it's really interesting that all of this affects ACs from just a map, right? And not all the county. So do you look at like how long term the effects last? Because the program, I think you said the program stuff lasts for a couple of years, right? And so how far do you look actually effects? And if they're going to persist?
Yeah, I think that's something that we could still look at because, the end line survey was conducted right as the program was ending. So there really wasn't a lot of time between when, let's say, the last person received the titling map, the parcel map, to when we measured the baseline. But of course, there will be some variation between the different beneficiaries of when to receive the parcel map. So we could potentially look at whether there's any heterogeneity depending on when in those, which I think was 7 years of implementation, they received that parcel map, how that may affect the significance or the magnitude of results. That will be interesting. Yeah, thank you for that comment.
Yeah, the last one, Professor. The first question is, have you ever paid usul, the first regression table that you presented? And this question was only asked to parcels for which respondent had reported knowing the landlord. So did you look at the parcels where those who were not knowing the landlord?
Yes. Yeah, so it was across the full sample, and then we also looked at it, whether or not there was differences in those portfolio payment levels for annual payments, for amount paid, and for did you ever, by ever, it was in the past 5 years ever, which is essentially since the program started, for the full sample and for those, yeah. And there wasn't a difference. That's why we're trying to unpack that puzzle, because there was like, well, and so we're looking into the literature on kinship issues and kind of social norms around payments within a family to try to see if there's some maybe like anthropological or sociological studies that would help us understand if like maybe that's not something we should expect to see. I do not know. I am not an expert in any of this. I'm just trying to think of like how to explain this result. And this is, again, back to our conversation this morning. The study, as you could tell from the data sources, we did not have qualitative data to draw on. So, this would, I think, to Ben's point about going back and doing the qualitative analysis after you find weird quantitative or unexplainable quantitative things or whatever, this would be another example. It would be really great to be able to do that and go back in.
And maybe to add, because this project, they did some studies themselves to get qualitative data with a cluster approach. And this is again going back to methodology. So it's somehow, there was the intention, because this is a project, and what you say this morning, spend a lot of energy also in communication, information, things like that. And they try to understand the effect. And then they share the report and look at it, and you look at it. And actually methodology was actually not systematic enough, that you actually could not really draw a message from it. And then this is actually a bit unfortunate, because you have a project trying to learn, but not having skills, not realizing that if you don't set it up in a certain way, the results are actually don't say a lot. So there wasn't, they made an effort, but I mean, you two look more into the methodology in the case, so I didn't remember exactly all the details, but it was very important.
Yeah.
That's a question for Uganda. As it's a large sample, and you wait 5 years for the end, did you have change in household? Did you have women who divorced? And then can you focus on them and see if then the communication really serve and rehearsal their relatively access to them?
So yes, so I shouldn't say yes. Wait, don't take that part. We really focused for this report on the kind of impact evaluation of the subgroup findings for the overall samples and the subgroups of interest. In terms of digging into the gender issues, I think this is a good source of data to do that, but we have not yet tried to link up specifically any of those sort of really interesting, nuanced issues. We were kind of going at the key outcomes and kind of, first wave of analysis. But I think this is and many of these evaluations have the data where if we just have, people with skills and interest, we can look at some of those issues in more detail. Yeah.
That's maybe one thing striking in this study, because it was very long, it was 5 to 6 years between baseline and here. I think the attrition was about 20 to 30%. So it was actually a migration out of this area, which you couldn't find because this is an area in Mailo, pretty close to Uganda. And we're not entirely sure what are the dynamics behind it. Actually, a lot of people were actually no longer there. And it wasn't completely clear where they went. It almost went like they went more further away from the city, which of course also which raises the question, it's almost impossible to find out, because it's good to have such a long period to compare. And there is also instability, particularly in areas where there is not completely urban, but there is also dynamics. How to deal with it, and how to think about it when you do the baseline, that you could somehow find back these people later, because it's not a story which was not able.
Yeah, I mean, again, to this issue of the sources of insecurity, the levels of insecurity and conflict in this area had the highest level of attrition that I've seen. And so, you can look at the report, but we did the balance and matching. The sort of design is fine. But yes, we did lose a number of baseline respondents. So this is also an interesting study for people who are interested in migration. Yeah, there were entire villages that left, and there were a number of households, like entire households that left. So if folks are interested in migration, you guys should.
Good question in terms of what to the land, what do they do to the land? What is the land?
Yeah, so
that is the point. And
look into the trace, because it was how so that's all these questions been like going and looking back at this area. And I don't know if you should have known that, because I was not really part of the baseline, knowing an area, you could have already sensed this dynamic there, because they would in a way want to know the past, you don't happen to those parcels. Because you're completely right. So there's a lot of extra stories, and then you've got data for those states, but for all the others, and you got, I don't even know what happened to these parcels. Maybe it is possible there, depending if these parcels have been navigate another way. But that we have not even tried yet, because it was really quite a struggle. But that is a completely indeed organic migration. And maybe the GSS is interested, because it's also getting access to ATMO data. So assuming that these parcels are maps, then trying to get access to this data, then how would you then know who's there? And then that's completely data access challenge. So probably a very interesting story for you run this.
You guys treated water at the points, the biggest. It's public, so you could, depending on the name matching, like there could be some findings as individuals and where they migrated to.
Sounds like a good PhD. Yeah. You want the dissertation? Name matching.
I had another question for the same Uganda project. It's so interesting. Is there a different interpretation of the Busulu payment that the treatment increased extractive power of landlords or extractive power of local elites? Because my initial reaction, I was thinking improvement. I was like, it's improvement in payment, like they're paying more. But I assume, I mean, I appreciate that the idea is that it's secure, it's a means of securing your tenure security, but I'm just wondering if you see potentially that there's a stronger clientelistic tie or a stronger extractive role.
So the anecdotal contextual issue is that it's such a low amount of money that the landlords will anecdotally not accept a payment so that they could have a justification for removing a tenant, right? Or they want to force the tenants to pay for the land so that they can get the amount of money that would be for like receiving a parcel. Selling a parcel would give them more money than continuing to have someone pay them a tiny little rent.
So if they accept it, they're agreeing to a norm where they can't expropriate the land.
As much money. And that's why it's a puzzle, if you will. I don't usually work in puzzles, but it is a puzzle in terms of the Busulu payment. Why then, if all you need to do, sorry for the language that's not great, is pay annually from Busulu and you secure that, why that's still, and it's a small amount, token amount, if you will, why that's not, there's not an uptick in that. After the knowledge and awareness raising, after the sort of, effort to do that. So I think that
the landlord could violate that anyway, right? It's an informal norm.
No.
It's a
Mailo is very odd and it's very interesting tenure system in Uganda. So if you look in the constitution, it's really one of the 4 recognized. So there, it's a very old colonial system. So there really, it's in the law. If you pay Busulu, your rights in the government, the district will accept your rights. So it's quite crucial. I mean, the moment you pay, your rights are much better. Even the amount is nothing. Of course, a landlord not accepting is in a way the person has his or her hands free to track it. Then, of course, it's indeed the relationship, the kinship, you trust or you can't, or but there's an uptake. So you do see people realizing I better pay my Busulu to improve my rights. But there's still quite a large group not doing it, and that is of course the puzzle. That's why it's so unique, and that's why it's also interesting. Looking ahead in Africa, say if you look at much more distended landlord relationships, it's always a challenge like how can you formalize this contract? How do you protect the rights of tenants? I don't know if that is a model. It is also very old model from colonial times, so that it is in a way working and not working, but it is giving some protection.
And people can even pay their Busulu not directly to the landlord, but to the landlords. So that because of this issue with landlords not accepting, right? So they do have a mechanism in place. I don't know how well that works. I am not a Uganda expert, but I know that the Uganda landlord does have have it in the system such that people can pay their local land offices in case their landlords are not accepting it. Yeah. So there's some interesting stuff.
There's Jessica Welch and A data, just back to this idea of the out migration for Uganda. Since they're in your baseline survey, would you want to look at that population? Because now they're not in your end line. You could look at those characteristics. Yeah. They might not be representative of the whole story, but that might at least give some indication of,
it's impossible. It's just completely impossible.
Well, we can, we have the dropped attrition. We were, of course, looking at like the attrition, whether or not there was differences between treatment and control in terms of those who got treated. That was our focus with like our evaluation craze. But now that the report is kind of wrapping up, we can go and look at sort of more of these like interesting descriptive things. If anyone has time, wants to help me do that.
Or PhD to finish.
Yeah. I'm looking at Laura. She's down the road, so she can maybe help us.
Fantastic. Any final questions? I'm going to pull on one last thread, which selfishly is the part that I had to miss in this morning's session, but links, Heather, to your finding around investment. I'm curious for those the papers that looked at this issue and this question that the farther and farther out we go, the harder it is to see these investment effects. That's starting to emerge in more and more pieces of work as the sort of body of work on these issues expands. I'm curious from those who spend their days thinking about research design and the link between program design and research design, and we're designing programs to reach some of these longer term goals, and we're seeing that it's hard to find evidence of that. And so I'm curious for those of you who think about research, what are ways that those who work on programs can be thinking better or differently about how to ensure that an investment is able to achieve some of these detectable goals that we're looking for.
I would put on the table standalone land projects in this type of rural context.
Say again, Karen?
A standalone land tenure project in this type of context of rural areas without an active land market, without credit availability on their own will not have this investment project. It needs more. It should be part of a wider approach. If you put it all in one Christmas tree, is another discussion, but without that, although people have this security, it will help in conflict. I think the dispute resolution is very important. It takes a lot of tensions. It will help in those individuals. They will produce probably more, and maybe we'll be able to tease that out later for those cases. But the overall effect, I think, if you cannot use that, and it's still the binding constraint to invest more in productivity, value chain, whatever, is it indeed still the land process?
The land alone may not be as
you need.
Yeah. I see.
Heather and then Ben.
Right. So integrated programs, I think those can still be done in a way that they're not Christmas trees, so that we can evaluate them. So that integrated programs and then testing them to see if it's land plus ag, the marginal benefits of the tenure that's needed. I think also just not focusing so much on measurement of investment for evaluations, right? Because we spend so much time doing agricultural productivity measures and investment measures in our surveys, and they're getting so long, right? And so if we want to measure sort of a more robust set of indicators that might be looking at other effects of tenure strengthening, that could be a way to kind of reduce. The other thing is thinking about what investments might really change, right? Like thinking a little harder about what investments could change instead of just like throwing them all in. And then the third thing, I totally forgot, so I'll let Ben.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that, the other conditions have to be there in order for tenure security to affect investment. I do think that in some cases, in some circumstances, standalone land projects can have an investment impact, and we shouldn't sort of throw that out. But I think it's important to be skeptical of it and not be looking for that in every project, and to be thinking carefully about whether people do have access to technology to make investments, credit to be able to afford the technology, and all these other things, instead of just kind of always hanging our hats on that investment impact.
Maybe to add, because it's also, don't assume everybody is tenure secure, but there are groups. So and who can also land tenure project can also be dangerous for people migrants. And so it might also be like, if you know that certain groups are more tenure insecure, who might indeed, because of that insecurity, will not invest. So you will not plant a tree if nobody accepts you there or whatever. So maybe you meet some target, but then you really have to be quite careful it doesn't work against it. Because this you get again in this landlord-tenant relation type of thing, like there is a lot of interest there. So it might be that you probably you can do a lot of communication, information, general mapping more across the board, but the more specific may have to be much more carefully designed, more targeted in a very careful way because it can easily backfire. It might be another, if I look this more looking at some of these more rural cases, but always more complex, like the migrants in West Africa, like they've got a quite complex position.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We're at time. I said this morning, but I'll say it again now. Fortunately, it's still only Tuesday, so hopefully, if there are more questions for our presenters on the important work that they've shared with us today, I hope that everyone will find a moment in the hallway to press on the things that are still on your mind. So thank you, Timothy, as you know, Maya and Heather and team for really thought-provoking, compelling, rich set of work that you've shared with us. Thank you.
Yeah.